Hello, good morning for everybody. My name is Claudio Eppelman. I am from Argentina. I am Executive Director of the Latin American Jewish Congress and as well representative to the Holy See of the World Jewish Congress. I would like to thank to Qatar for hosting this conference and to Professor Al-Naimi, my friend, for the opportunity to meet you here in Doha. We will have a panel with 6 participants. Everyone will have 10 minutes, and we will keep some minutes for questions at the end of the panel. And I will introduce every participant only with the name, and if everyone would like to add any remark about your position or your job to allow the public to know about your background, please feel free to do it. First participant, Mr. Ranko Otic.
Thank you. Distinguished participants, first of all, I would like to say thank you to be invited on this conference, but I would like to start with something what is really going on in this moment in my country. 20 days ago, I was in position as a Vice Prime Minister and Minister of Interior. I am coming from Croatia. This country is situated between Austria, Slovenia, Italy, in the middle of the Europe. We are member state, but important thing is, you know, that last 5 months, 650,000 people pass through Croatia, and daily minimum 2,000 of them are coming in Croatia. Why I'm mentioning this? Because of one reason. Croatia was in war in early 90s, and we have the same experience. More than 1 million people was displaced, and because of that, only European country which show this kind of humanity solidarity with refugees is Croatia. I am able to say this, and I would like to thanks also to Qatar government, because 72 hours after my call and when I speak with the Minister of Interior in same moment, His Highness Prime Minister, 72 hours later, first help with Hercules airplane came to Croatia to help us in our efforts to solve this problem, to give the full, solidarity with refugees. That was the beginning. But it is important as well that Croatia country, where about 90% of people are Roman Catholics, we are very proud, and I would like to say that we are example of one of the real countries where Muslim society is fully integrated. There is no difference. It is not just because the number. It is not just because of percentage how many Muslims are living in Croatia. Thing is, you know, that they are part of our society, not only because of law, because in Croatia there is law which is guaranteed to the minority, to confession, to have all rights. We have 25 imams in Croatia. They are allowed to have everything in schools, in hospitals. They are ready to help people in prisons. They are preparing our soldiers when they are going in the peacekeeping missions all over the world. And difference is, you know, that in our experience, this year will be 100 years of history of Muslim society in Croatia, when we start with Meshihat in Croatia. And I would like to say that we are positive example. That's why I would like to say to all of you, first child which was born during this migrant crisis in Croatia get the name Amal. It's hope. And my opinion is, you know, that it is very important to share with you that somebody who is coming from the Roman Catholic country, where we have the same experience. This hope still exists. And I would like to say, that that's why I am on this conference. I am always ready to speak with the people, to make a discussion, because any kind of situation that is forbidden something, it is not possible to speak, it is not solution, and our positive example is something what is possible to share with all others. I know that there is possibility to get 10 minutes, but my opinion is, that it's much better to don't read this, what I have on the paper, because it will take a long time. I will be ready to speak with all of you or answer on your question. Thank you for your attention, and believe me, if you like, I will give this on the administrators, my speech, and it will be on your disposal, because here is exactly with the details how it's organized, institutions, articles in the law, school, and everything else in Croatia, in, I'm saying, small country, 4.5 million people, but in the middle of the Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stijic, for your short or brief presentation. Now the floor is from Mr. Baker, please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good morning. Mr. Chairperson, colleagues in the panel, the organizers of this conference, I would like to take this opportunity to thank, first of all, the center, the Doha Center, International Center for Interfaith Dialogue, for having invited me to this conference. I have submitted a full paper to the organizer of this conference. The title of the paper is Spiritual and Intellectual Empowerment of Contemporary Youth, Defining Strategies and Methods. It's a long paper, so given the 10 minutes, I'll try to summarize. Although it's a bit difficult because I thought when I wrote that, everything written there is important. So anyway, my main concern in this presentation is precisely spiritual and intellectual empowerment of our contemporary youth, which is the concern, one of the themes of this conference. Now, let me state the problem briefly, which serves as the background of my paper. We are witnesses today to the social phenomena of increasing violence, all types of violence in our society. There is increasing violence, domestic violence, violence in the home, violence in schools, political violence out there in the community, violence in the neighborhood, political violence, religious violence. It's all increasing. Now, it is important for us to pose this question to us. What are the fundamental, what are the roots of these problems of violence? I think we need to go to those roots because it has become a kind of a way of life, a kind of a norm. In all sectors of human life, we only are touching the surfaces. We're all approaching our problems in a superficial way. We don't go to the roots of the problem, and that's why the problems persist. It's just like if I were to take the medical analogy, we are treating symptoms, but we are not treating the real disease. And I think this can be applied to all sectors of our life today. Of course, not just to go to the roots of the problem, but also to look for the deepest level of solutions. Notwithstanding all the wonderful work that has been done, we have heard yesterday, for example, the various kinds of works have been done, but we need to still to think of the much deeper level of our solutions. Now, I put a claim that a root cause of our problem is the decline of quality of spiritual and moral education in contemporary society. From an institutional perspective, from the perspective of institutions, there are two main causes. One, the decline, the weakening of our traditional home, the traditional family, the weakening of basically it is the decline of the family institution itself. There is a major cause for that, because the traditional home used to be a provider of spiritual and moral education, not by itself, but in complementary to other what I call the traditional triads. The traditional triads, home, school, and by extension, colleges and universities, and the community. But these three institutions no longer play that complementary role. So when we talk about school, we're talking about formal education. Yesterday we listened to a very, very nice lecture about formal education, non-formal education. With the weakening of the role of the family, it's kind of passing the buck, or passing the role. Family pass the role of educating their children to schools. In good times, it's okay, but now, the formal education itself is in crisis. In other words, the schools, colleges are not able to deliver what we expect in response to this phenomena of violence. So, what is the proper solution? Proper solution is spiritual and intellectual environment of contemporary youth. But that term itself is very high loaded. What do you mean by spiritual empowerment? What do you mean by intellectual empowerment? These are very important, but there's still much misunderstanding or very low understanding of this. So that the concept itself now needs to be articulated. And of course, the question of the way we propose, try to solve this problem, again, I think apart from going to the roots, I think the question of the holistic approach. The understanding of the holistic approach is that one form of violence is related to other forms of violence. If you just tackle one form of violence, ignoring the other forms of violence, that's not going to work. So we must be an integrated approach to this. I like very much the latest encyclical of Pope Francis, where he proposed this idea of integral ecology. Now, what it means by integral ecology is none other than unity of physical psychology and spiritual psychology, or Tawhidic approach, basically, within the traditional framework of Islamic teaching on Tawhid. Perhaps it's good for us to go back to what Ibn Khaldun said centuries ago when he proposed the idea of Ilm al-Umran. In other words, the concept of Umran, and certainly we're talking about integral ecology, where we have both physical ecology and cultural ecology combined, integrated to that perspective. I think that's very, very important. And in a way, since I don't have much time, since the issue here is about education, I think there's a need really to look at the current syllabus curriculum on religious education. I know that in a good number of Muslim countries, the religious education curriculum has not been revised for decades. And yet, the world has developed so much, the socio-cultural conditions out there, which are frequented by our youth, have developed, and then of course there's the cyber culture, but our education curriculum does not take into account of all this. I think that's very, 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 very important, because what we're going to because the key idea in our proposal here is self-empowerment and collective empowerment. Of course, this, what do you mean by self-empowerment is empowerment of our youth with spiritual and moral and intellectual qualities that enable them to withstand against all the pressures, all the influences from outside. And looking at the situation now, I don't think we are really, of course there's some good work out there, but generally speaking, as a whole, taken as a whole, there is a decline of spiritual education. It's not that the community doesn't realize, no, but we need to look at the proposal. I think everybody welcomes, but the answer is spiritual and religious empowerment. But for many people, it is understood in quantitative terms. What do you mean by quantitative terms? Well, there's so much crime out there, problems among the youth and so on. Let us have more classes, religious classes. 2 more minutes, okay, thank you. Let us have more religious classes. If before, only 45 minutes to 1 hour, perhaps once a week, now society, civil society will call on the ministries of education, let us have, say, twice a week or something. But it's purely quantitative. But we never bother to look at now what is the quality of that religious education. How effective is that religious education? I think this is, again, the question of we need to have an integrated approach to our religious education in our effort to confront the challenges out there, which in a sense are also very, very interrelated to each other. So my conclusion is really that what we call the traditional triad, family, school, and community, they need to play their complementary role in education. And I think in terms of the resources, they are there in terms of resources of Islam to tackle the problems of the current period of humankind. But the resources need to be repackaged, rearticulated in conformity with the needs of our times, in the language of contemporary language of our youth that they can understand, and of course to make use of all the things that are provided by the latest technology for example, certainly the cyber, what I call the cyber space technology. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Edward Kessler, my friend, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Friends, thank you to Dr. Ibrahim, the organizers of this conference. Since I only have 10 minutes, I have to ask you a question. What is your favorite hobby? Eating? Reading? Well, let me tell you mine. Arguing. Years ago, there was a TV series in the UK called The Long Search. When the presenter came to the subject of religion, he was in a state of shock, and he called the program The Holy Argument. If you think about it, what is a biblical or rabbinic commentary or a tafsir? There is a kind of argument going on. In fact, in the small print, there are arguments about arguments about arguments. And if I were to describe the literature of the Abrahamic faiths, the best I'd come up with is an anthology of arguments. And this, it seems to me, is one way to protect our youth from alienation. For the question is not just, why do we argue? Everybody argues. The question is, why is argument central to the religious experience? Why is it the very structure of religious thought? And I wonder whether this is to do with our opposition to a fundamental principle of logic called the law of contradiction. The law of contradiction says that a statement and its negation cannot be true at the same time. Logic says it cannot be both Tuesday morning and Friday evening at the same time. That is the law of contradiction. Yet I have learnt from studying the encounters between religions that the law of contradiction does not apply. And why is that? Because we reject the idea that truth is two-dimensional. Very often, it is not the matter of either true or false. Two conflicting propositions can both be true. It just happens to depend on where we are standing and what is our perspective. A Jewish philosopher from Columbia University called Sidney Morgenbesser was attending a class on logic, in which the lecturer pointed out the logical asymmetry between a negative, a negation, and an affirmation. That two negatives make a positive, but that two positives do not make a negative. Sidney at the back of the room shouted, "Yeah, yeah." He wanted to show that the principle of logic does not always apply. In other words, one approach to protecting young Jews, Christians, and Muslims against various types of propaganda and all sorts of extremism is to engage both sides on what often looks like a contradiction, because we are not dealing anymore with a two-dimensional world, but rather with 3 or 4 dimensions. Because whenever you see things in 2 dimensions, it is either true or it is false. That there can only be one perspective. And that is the ideology and that is the theology that we must reject to protect our youth. There is always more than one perspective. That is the vision of the Wolf Institute, the vision of the Doha International Center for Interfaith Dialogue, in fact, the vision of all of us here who are touched by what I would call the angel of interfaith dialogue. Because if I'm standing here, things seem different from what you see sitting over there. We're seeing the world from different perspectives. In my institute's teaching in Cambridge and around the world, we seek to confer dignity on how the world looks to me and how the world looks to you. In other words, there is an attempt to do justice to the fact that there is more than one point of view, there is more than one truth. Now, supposing you and I see things differently, we have different perspectives on reality, is that it? What do we do in those circumstances? Well, this is key. We have to meet, we have to talk, we have to engage, we have to converse. You can tell me how the world appears to you, and I can tell you how the world appears to me. We have a dialogue, we have an encounter. And through that encounter, we learn what it feels like to be different, and we bridge the distance between 2 perspectives. One approach I use in the classroom is to ask my students to reflect on language, to mediate, to meditate on the power of words to build and to destroy, to heal and to harm. In words, God created the universe. In words, we are taught, God reveals himself to us. The first thing God gave Adam was the gift of naming the animals, using words to categorize and thus begin to understand the world around us. According to one religious tradition, Homo sapiens is described as the speaking being. And yet the great irony of our time is that we have created technologies of instant global communication, yet we find ourselves talking less and less with those with whom we disagree. The internet, the social media allow us to choose the news we hear and the voices to which we listen and the friends to which we friend. And this way makes our work so much more urgent, so much more pressing. And as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, we live in the fierce urgency of now. Our task is more than logical, it is dialogical. It gives dignity to the multiple perspectives from which we perceive reality. And the only ways we can handle that are by meeting, having a dialogue, learning how to disagree, and managing difference. In other words, argument becomes holy when it does justice to more than one point of view. The Quran states, "We have created you male and female, have made you nations and tribes that you may recognize one another." The principle of dialogue, of difference, lies at the heart of Judaism, of Christianity, and of Islam. We proclaim the unity of God and the diversity of human experience. Now, We are facing in our day bigotry, violence, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Christian hatred that plague our societies across the world. People of all faiths and none are persecuted because of their beliefs, or rather, because of other people's misconceptions about them. Ignorance breeds fear, fear breeds hatred, and hatred breeds conflict, dehumanizing those who we do not know or understand. So I present to you 4 strategies for applying encounter and dialogue in education to overcome youth alienation. 1, encourage through education mutual understanding between people of different religious perspectives and none. Affirm shared values and establish trust so as to provide a framework within which to learn to accept difference and to address contentious issues positively. 2, encounter people from different religions to move beyond just learning about each other's traditions. At the heart of an encounter lies the sharing of personal stories which help us see beyond our own experience and counteract the dehumanizing of the other which exists in a greater or lesser degree in all our communities. 3, engage with one another with respect for what the other is and has to say. And this begins with the individual and is never less than personal, but can develop in such a way as to be extended to a group, even to communities. We can no longer afford to avoid difficult issues or leave these to be resolved outside the educational system. And 4, encourage leaders of faith communities, parents and teachers to ensure that children, students are secure in their own faith and so experience encounter in a positive and confident way. Encounter serves not to confuse, but reinforces religious identity, and its aim is conversation, not conversion, dialogue, not knowledge. Because in the end, it is in hearing that we listen, it is in listening that we start to understand, and it is upon understanding and facilitating encounters that we should base our education. Thank you.
Marianne El Hatami, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. So my paper is entitled Women as Providers of Spiritual Security, a New Paradigm from Morocco. So this paper addresses Morocco's counter-radicalization strategy based in part on training and deploying female religious leaders, and thus looks at the role of organized women's agency in influencing at-risk members of society and the role of the formal political sphere in developing a strategic approach to counter-radicalization through soft power initiatives and religious branding. So the Arab Spring has brought religion to the fore of political debate because of the rise of extremism in countries in transition. This presents new challenges to the intersections between religion and politics and how contemporary religious actors and structures are impacting international politics. Morocco is the country where the revolutionary fervor of the Arab Spring produced significant reforms without threatening the legitimacy of the regime. This has presented Morocco as a model country due to its engagement in a process of democratization. The exceptionalism of Morocco also hinges on the reforms which the country engaged in over the past decade to preserve the spiritual security of the country and promote a more moderate Islam which counters the rising momentum of Islamism. Moroccan scholar Driss Maghraoui argues that the restructuring of the religious field has taken on a security dimension. Quote, "Security is perceived here as part of a moral security to guarantee a particular kind of Moroccan moral order." Maghraoui further notes that Morocco has, for centuries, been a Muslim society in which religion plays an important role as a generalizing ideological force for politics, cultural identity, and nationalist consciousness, and where Islam has been ideologically constructed to be attached to a number of components, namely Malikism and Sunnism, that the Moroccan state has over the years aspired to keep central to a certain conception of Moroccan Islam. Therefore, concepts such as moderation, tolerance, openness become part of the lexicon of the official discourse which defines Moroccan Islam. Hence, with the emergence of terrorism, reliance upon such a lexicon becomes even more compelling in order to have further control over the religio-political sphere. The concept of spiritual security emerged in the context of the 2000 terrorist attacks which took place in Casablanca. The tragic magnitude of the event urged Moroccan authorities to reconsider the state's religious policy and redefine Moroccan Islam based on three strategies or components: endorsing the monarchy as a source of national security, promoting Maliki Sufi Islam, and reforming the religious sphere to protect the country from invasive religious expressions. This measure was marked by the training of male and female imams, reforming religious structures, and monitoring places of worship. These efforts are particularly salient given that Morocco has around 50,000 trained imams. In June 2014, King Mohammed VI inaugurated a religious support plan that puts an extra 1,300 imams in places of worship to monitor religious discourse. The mainstreaming of gender approach to the country's counter-radicalization strategy is particularly compelling. State-sponsored Islamic feminism appeared in the aftermath of the 2003 terrorist attacks in Casablanca as a state's endeavor to control and monitor the religious field in order to eradicate terrorism and construct a new competing force to the activism carried by Islamist movements whose strength both within and outside of formal political institutions had grown considerably. This also serves to develop a positive international image of Morocco. Since 2003, a number of reforms and initiatives, which mainly included recognizing women's issues and honoring their demands, were introduced. This included revising the family law in favor of women to achieve an egalitarian family model and a rethinking of gender dynamics at both the social and political levels. The new family code was introduced in 2004 and sought to reconcile Morocco's adherence to the Maliki school of jurisprudence to secular standards of women's rights. This engendered reconsiderations of sacred texts to empower women. This was further complemented by including female preachers, murshidat, whose vital role lies in reaching out to women in underprivileged and marginalized areas of the country. The murshidat are state-trained preachers or religious leaders who offer religious talks and counseling in mosques and other institutions, including schools, hospitals, prisons, etc. Their primary role is to curb the growing momentum of extremism by disseminating a moderate version of Islam. They have the responsibility of protecting Morocco's religious identity that comprises honoring King Mohammed VI as the commander of the faithful and promoting a Maliki Sufi doctrine, and thus contribute to de-radicalization. By educating women and mothers, providing a safe and productive avenue for youths, and providing positive alternatives for prison inmates, the murshidat are changing the tide of terrorism by blunting potential catalysts. Therefore, the murshidat are deployed across the country with a twofold mission: to promote women's rights and combat extremist thought. Their work is an interesting blend of traditional religious advocacy and feminist activism. Through restructuring the role of the mosque as a center for educational and social exchange, the murshidat are particularly invested in addressing the socio-economic and political concerns of the youth in particular. Although most of Morocco's mosques were officially under the supervision of the Ministry of Islamic Affairs prior to 2003, many mosques, especially in marginalized and underprivileged neighborhoods, functioned outside of the control of the ministry. The independent but radical voices of many of the preachers who run these mosques started to become popular and attract the poor segments of society, especially the youth. Quote, in addition to denouncing Western influence and US wars in different parts of the Islamic world, radical preachers started to target the Moroccan regime, and the religious role of the king also came under harsh criticism, unquote. As a result, the state launched a crackdown on mosques associated with radical groups. While the clampdown may result into the emergence of a more clandestine activities, it nevertheless highlights the importance of security measures in controlling the religious sphere. Also, with the youth's disenchantment with the monitored religious discourse and the dominant political ideologies, other platforms have emerged as alternative sources of knowledge and practice, creating multiple forms of religiosity and realms that intersect in complex ways. At the micro level, Morocco is witnessing peculiar mixtures of what could be perceived as traditional practices and norms with entirely new religious interpretations and sets of values that originate in the emerging diverse social arenas in the context of dynamic cultural processes, as well as the hybridized local and global influences. Technology plays a particularly important role in constructing collective and individual identities. It provides easier access to religious scholarship beyond the authority of local preachers and gives a voice to young Muslims who have become more engaged in criticizing religious establishments and creating their own interpretations. Dale Eichelman notes that access to new technologies has multiplied the channels through which ideas and information can be circulated. Quote, it has eroded the ability of authorities to censor and repress, to project an uncontested central message defining political and religious issues for large numbers of people. Censors may still restrict what is said in the mainstream press and broadcast media, but these media have lost the exclusivity they once had. Mass education and the availability of alternative media have irrevocably altered how authoritative discourse is read and heard. The proliferation of new uncontrolled self-authorizing clerics urged the inaction of a comprehensive reform covering religious personnel, the issuing of fatwas, and the media, among many other institutional aspects of religious life. Official television and radio have thus been used to communicate tenets of Moroccan Islam and provide a platform for programs that challenge ideas that are perceived as foreign to the country's religious tradition. The Ministry of Islamic Affairs has established nationwide programs that target youth development in both urban and rural areas and engages the youth's awareness and eventual rejection of extremist ideology despite the dominant social and global influences. So on the one hand, religious reform provides a space for women to work within the system in order to create incremental yet lasting change in their respective communities. Nonetheless, the authority threshold of the Morshidat is limited to focusing on security measures. The Morshidat, as well as other religious actors, can play an important role in advancing a more tolerant interpretation of Islam if more independent exercise of theological knowledge is engaged, especially that they have better access to different social categories and social institutions due to their official status. A comprehensive approach to reform should also promote collaboration with secularly oriented civil society actors to encourage better dialogue in order to avoid societal polarizations that could be conducive to a culture of violence. Therefore, the Murshidaats could play a better role if they are part of a more comprehensive and sustainable approach to countering extremism. Moderate religious teaching and counseling is not sufficient in eradicating the sweeping threat of extremism while ideological polarizations prevail. And thank you very much.
Mr. Hassan Abdallah Al-Badawi, please, the floor is yours.
صباح الخير. حسن بدوي، من أستاذ في التاريخ العربي الإسلامي والبيزنطي في جامعة أرسطو باليونان. أولاً أود أن أشكر اليونان وسفارة دولة قطر في أثينا لقيامهم بترشيحي لجائزة المؤتمر، وأشكر اللجنة المنظمة لموافقتها على كلمة اليوم. مع احتجاج بسيط أن 10 دقائق عادة تنتهي قبل أن تبدأ، ولا يستطيع الإنسان بكلمة معدل 20 دقيقة أن ينهيها أو يقضي عليها بمعنى أصح في 10 دقائق. ومع ذلك التاريخ يعلم، وأنا متخصص في التاريخ، ولهذا سأنظر إلى الإسلام في علاقته مع الآخر من خلال التاريخ. Consideration of the other in Islam from historical point of view. First approach. On the sidelines of international politics of the then two superpowers, Byzantium and Persia, Islam had its appearance as a socio-religious and later political movement that dominated in the heart of the former Hellenistic world. The rise of Islam in the Arab Peninsula in the beginnings of the 7th century is considered a very important landmark in the history of the Arabs, a major historical fact which is equal to an ethnogenesis. Islam has had a revolutionary reflection on global history, since after the emergence of Islam, whatever happened in the Caliphate had its direct influence on the 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. After the 7th century, the history of the Middle and Near East is closely bound to the history of Islam. The space where Islamic civilization was developed is today a continuous and tremendous geographical area. It is situated between the African shores of the Atlantic Ocean and reaches to the China Sea. It is a multinational room with independent states whose link in power level is economic and the level of nations emotional and religious. The history of the Arab Islamic classical period of the peoples of the Eastern Mediterranean is just an expression of the social needs of the historical time and of the cultural influences of the earlier national civilization of the area and of the cultural models of the neighboring societies. Therefore, the classical Arab Islamic civilization can be described as a synthesis of the civilization of the urban centers of Arabia, of the civilization of the Arab diaspora, of the cultural tradition of the Arab tribes, of the civilization and tradition of the conquered peoples, and of the cultural conditions and circumstances that had to be served by the society which emerged after the Islamization of the area. This approach would not try to distinguish historical facts from the lifestyle that shaped, because we believe that culture is a projection of the needs and goals of a society and is formed through a process of ongoing dialogue between the existing and the useful, or more specifically, of the authorities of the Arab Islamic power and of the efficiency as well as the effectiveness that this power met in the cultures which conquered. But a key element for understanding the history of Islamic world remains the approach of civilization, formed under the rule of Islam and eventually produced the identity of the region. This is the culture that was created in the region of the older Hellenistic East after the Arab conquest of the 7th and 8th century and until the appearance of the Mongol tribes. This period has concentrated all the features of the more distant historical developments in other regions because in 4 centuries, Arab peoples mature nationally, dominate politically, and they diffuse culturally and finally are dissolved into their cultural creation. Historians and researchers dealing with the history of the Arab Islamic world usually pay more attention to military conflicts than to the rich forms and means of communication that coexisted and co-functioned in parallel with warfare. This approach will try to determine what is Islam or Islamic mainstream and what its relationship with the other is. For what is Islam, there are many interpretations and determination tenets of the meaning and the content. First of all, there is a symbiotic relationship between Islam and history, between Islam and society as well. In terms of religion, Islam is the youngest monotheistic religion that emerged, spread, and established itself in the wider region of Eastern Mediterranean. Islam believes that it renews the divine command, continues and modernizes the preaching and the law of the Old and New Testament. The new code that Islam essentially introduces to the Arabs is the absolute equality of all people towards the one and the unique God, the creator of the seen and the unseen. The elimination of blood kinship, the core of the tribal and racial identity with its extensions in relation to us and the other. From a historical, however, standpoint, Islam can be approached as a successful coincidental effort to integrate the inhabitants of Arabia in the historical time of the Eastern Mediterranean peoples through the admixture of morals, ethos, customs, codes of conduct of the tribal customary law with the traditions and institutions of the conquered by the Arab peoples. Islam historically has caused the transcendence of the tribal political institutions and system, following the route of de-Arabization of the Arabs. Islam, from the political point of view, is an ethnogenetic process of the Arabs through the merger of the already dissolved Arab tribes with the abolition of their tribal institution, which will lead to the passage from the tribe on the concept of the nation. Etymologically, the term Islam is connected with the Arabic term salam. And in those early days, indeed, Islam was promoting on social cohesion and harmony. Islam is not only religion and politics, but also civilization. The how Islam as a religion sees other religions, as politics the other policies, and as civilization with its own social dimension the other cultures, is a matter of historical approach of Islam itself. As a religion, emphasis was given to the unity of all the messages of all religions, وحدة الرسالات. All comes from the same divine source, that is the one and only God, or for the same purpose and ultimate destination as well, with different name and form due to the different conditions and circumstances of time and space of the appearance of each message. Muhammad himself, the Prophet, developed a philosophical argumentation in favor of rigorous, without intermediary monotheism. His approach was practical and as such fascinated the pragmatic Arabs. The Holy Quran points out constantly that Muhammad did not come to abolish the oldest religions that speak of the one and unique God, nor he denies their prophets and to inaugurate a new faith. His message, he says, is the same as that of Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. According to the Quran and Islamic tradition, Muhammad is the continuation of all, without exception, previous prophets. He considers Abraham as the patriarch of the prophets and the first Muslim. From the study of the primary sources of Islam, especially the first book of the Arabs, the Holy Quran, as well as the constitution of the Ummah, known as Al-Sahifa, one may draw definite conclusions which determined from the very beginnings the relationship of Islam to the other, in all dimensions of coexistence and forms of partnerships within and outside the territory of Dar al-Islam. To understand the perception of the other according to Islam in religious, social, economic, and political terms, historical knowledge is highly necessary for the light. Historical knowledge is highly necessary for the how was brought to formed and transformed Islam's first political entity. The multi-tribal inter-Arabs firstly and the multiracial later on internationally, the religious pluralism and multiculturalism mark a historical area of research, search, and display of the relationship between Islam and the other, the seemingly different. The Ummah of that period was mostly within the Muslim Arabs, al-Muhajirun wal-Ansar. Reading Sahifat al-Ummah, we remark also the participation of Jewish tribes and Judaized Arabs, Christian Arabs, Persians, Ethiopians, Indians, and even Zoroastrian Arabs and al-Mushrikun, in particular during the early years of the new established Ummah. This enables the coexistence with the other, since God is a God of the heart beyond name, fame, face, and race and faith, and imposed the acceptance and mutual respect of different religions and nationalities, a view which clearly is recorded and reported in the Holy Quran. Characteristic examples are the following reports. The constitution of the Ummah, within the rules and provisions of the symbiosis with the other, secure the institution of religious freedom and the end of time. Unbelievable. In spite of that, I hope this written text will be published in the acts of the Congress. Just 1 minute. In conclusion, it could be argued that the long geographical proximity, the historical coexistence, and therefore the cultural symbiosis of Islam to the other, from its emergence to date, displays diverse formats and means of communication, sometimes peacefully, sometimes by war. Trade, troops, war prisoners, teachers, embassies, the exchange of gifts, religions, theology, philosophy, science, mysticism, art, common cultural inheritance, backgrounds, and even the language of emotions with love affairs and mixed marriages, transcendence, the hope and the prospect of peaceful coexistence that put forward from what naturally history preserved and allowed us to know are some of the means and forms which determine the meaning, content, duration, and scope, as well as the quality of Islam's relationships with the other, carrying important messages for modern time. Thank you.
Dear Muhammad Al-Samak.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it seems that I have to go on with the group to speak in English, this session to be like that. There is an Austrian philosopher from Vienna. Our friends here might know him. He's a Jewish philosopher. His name is Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein has a very interesting theory. He says, if you ask somebody how much is 2 plus 2, If the answer is 5, this is wrong. But if the answer is 79, this is not wrong. This is different concept. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have different concept with the rise of extremism. And this is making our situation so dangerous. Why it is dangerous? Let me give you just 2 figures to signify this dangerousness. The first, philosopher André Malraux, the French philosopher, was Minister of Culture during Charles de Gaulle's time, and he was his counselor. In the 60s of the last century, Malraux said the 21st century will be the century of religion, or it will be not. Now, this prophecy came to be true now. And this is what I'm going to focus on. According to the UN statistics, 84% of the people of the world believe in one religion or the other. 84% are religious people. And from the rest, 1,100,000,000 individuals believe that there is a creator or something extraordinary maneuvers the universe. So religion is really becoming all over the world now. But what makes it more interesting is the second number I will give you. Christianity, during the early 19th century, 80% of Christians at the early 19th century were in Europe and the Americans. Today, 2/3 of Christians are in the Third World. Christianity is moving south. South America, Asia, and Africa, where other religions like Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism are there. So Christianity is not anymore the religion of the white, of the rich, of the imperialists. It's now the religion of the poor, of the oppressed, and of the colored. Now there are more Presbyterians in South Korea than in the United States itself. So we have a different situation. If I give an Islamic example, there are 1,600,000,000 Muslims all over the world. 1,600,000,000. 1/3 of these Muslims, that's about 600 million Muslims, are living in countries and societies which are not Islamic. So there is this interconnectedness of multiple people of multiple religions. The situation will be either we promote the culture of accepting and respecting differences, or we'll be in a continuous fight and struggle forever. Now, how can we do that? I'm sorry, the time will not allow me to elaborate, but I will try to focus only on Muslims and a sort of self-criticism. In Islam, like any other religion, there is the holy text and there is the interpretation of the text. The holy text is sacred for us. is permanent and is absolute. But understanding the text is human, and anything human is open to be right or wrong. So understanding the text is not sacred anymore, is not permanent anymore, and is relative. Now, our problem, I believe, is that we consider, we is maybe not true, some of us consider that the text and understanding the text, the interpretation are sacred like each other. The interpretation is considered sacred, permanent, and absolute. This is wrong. And this is our real problem in the 21st century. We do respect highly scholars of the Middle Ages and before, but we do not have to stick to what they said forever. We respect, we learn from it, and we consider the Quranic text and the Hadith of the Prophet as the real sources for the interpretation according to the 21st century requirements. We have to open, because as the British sociologist Huxley said, defining a problem is half the way to solve it. We have to, first, before we define the problem, we have to admit that there is a problem. If we don't admit that we are in a problematic situation, we cannot find a way out. That requires a sort of encouragement of facing realities and building a better future. Thank you.
Now we have a few minutes. If someone of the public would like to ask a question or to do a very short remark, please, the floor is yours. In the podium here at the moment, do you have a micro? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Ibrahim Özdemir. I'm from Turkey. I thank all presenters, although the time was very limited, but their talk inspired us to think deep about some major issues. My question is to Dr. Osman Bakr. He told us about the spiritual improvement of the youth through education. However, he says there are some Muslim countries, their curriculum, their educational system is not changed for decades. So, how we can reach youth and give them hope, give them new vision to prepare for the future. As Professor said, to let them to have a healthy identity in the 21st century if they do not understand the major concepts, what is going on the world. So can you talk a little bit about this? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I think when we talk about intellectual empowerment of our youth, for example, basically we need to go to the schools. One that needs to be addressed, the question of the role of rational thinking in religion. What happens, what we observe is that there's kind of gap between religious awareness and rational thinking. There's separation between the kind of iman and knowledge, faith and knowledge. So a kind of some space is created in the mind of young people that somehow aspects of religion cannot be rationalized, and many youth are kind of turned away, or they simply remain indifferent because they don't connect themselves what religion teaches and in terms of their rational thinking. So that address needs to be shortcoming needs to be addressed. Basically, in Islam, iman and amal, ayn and amal, that must go together. That unity. So it's very important. If we do care to reflect upon the consequences, what are the consequences of such a perspective on the young? How can they respond to the numerous currents of thought? Numerous currents of thought, they are very challenging, that their minds are not critical enough to be able to respond to those challenges. And the other thing, of course, I would like to suggest that in terms of programs for youth, there are plenty, but then I think we also need the knowledge dimension. Perhaps we need to, some Muslim countries, or in every Muslim country, majority Muslim country, set up a kind of institute of youth and religion to study youth in all its dimensions, youth psychology, youth even include the gap, that generation gap between the young and the old, where the question of transmission of traditional values becomes hampered because of that discontinuity, that gap. So I think there's a need to look at youth studies in all its dimensions, and I can tell you that there are, I find really, I mean, in my own country, Malaysia, I mean, we don't have that university which devotes its study earnestly to youth studies. And of course, also the studies of old people, yes, but not the young. Very interesting.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بشكل مختصر جدا بدي أشكر الدكتور سماك على هذا العرض المميز. ثانيا بالنسبة للدكتورة مريم، حقيقة أخت مريم ما في شيء بالإسلام اسمه مذهب سني. السنة هم أهل الذكر، هم المسلمون أصلا. هناك مذاهب فقهية كالمذاهب الفقهية المعروفة، المذهب الحنفي، المالكي، الشافعي، وحتى المذهب الجعفري هو مذهب من المذاهب المتعددة في الإسلام. كما أن هناك ليس مذهبا صوفيا، التصوف سلوك، والسنة هم أهل الإسلام، والمذاهب هي مذاهب فقهية تعرض وجهة نظرها، قد تصيب وقد تخطئ، ولذلك حبيت أصحح هذه الفكرة. الموضوع الثالث ولو بشكل سريع، أتمنى أن يكون هناك مؤتمر عن التطرف، أسبابه وتداعياته. هناك إجماع على رفض التطرف، ولكن بنفس الوقت هناك تطرف في الكثير من أتباع الديانات والقوميات على مدى القرن العشرين والقرن الواحد وعشرين. هناك تركيز على نوع معين من التطرف. المطلوب دراسة التطرف بكل أسبابه ومناشئه والأسباب التي أدت إلى هذا التطرف. وأتمنى على مركز الدوحة الدولي للحوار أن ينظر إلى هذا الموضوع، ويكون هناك مؤتمر خاص بالتطرف وتداعياته. شكرا.
Shukran. Thank you, Dr. Uthman, for quoting Pope Francis about environment, about ecology. And I think this letter from the Pope Francis, Laudato Si, about environment as the common home for all, prepared for a pure large dialogue among religions, that environment is common challenges and common hopes for all. الدكتور السماك، شكرا لحديثك الشيق دائما، ولكن أنا أعتقد بأن الاحترام المتبادل بين أتباع الأديان خاصة في شرقنا الأوسط لن يتم بالاكتفاء بالحديث عن حرية العبادة في الوطن العربي، ولكن دعونا نبدأ، أنتم العلماء المسلمون الأعزاء، نبدأ بالحديث عن الحرية الدينية بكامل معناها. شكرا لكم.
أبونا، بالنسبة لموضوع الحرية الدينية، نحن مدركون تماما أهمية هذا الأمر، خاصة في ضوء الأوضاع التي تتنافى مع الحرية الدينية في المنطقة العربية في الشرق الأوسط. لكن هناك مبادرات إسلامية للتأكيد على موضوع الحرية الدينية انطلاقا من الالتزام العقيدي بالإسلام. في بيروت، نحن في بيروت أصدرنا بيان بيروت للحريات الدينية. مؤتمر مراكش اللي عقد أخيرا وكان لي شرف المشاركة فيه أصدر بيانا أيضا حول الحرية الدينية، وكلمة الملك محمد السادس كما تحدثت الأخت كانت مفتاحا لهذا البيان الإسلامي الذي يؤمن بالحرية الدينية وقبل ذلك كان مؤتمر الأزهر حول الحريات الدينية، ومؤتمر مكة حول رفض التطرف والإرهاب، ومؤتمر عمان حول الإسلام والدولة المدنية التي تجمع. وسيادتك أعتقد على علم في هذا الأمر. لا أعتقد بأن العلماء المسلمين يقصرون في التأكيد على مبدأ الحرية الدينية، ليس للالتزام بدعوات خارجية أو بسبب مطالب معينة، إنما انطلاقا من إيمانهم الإسلامي وترجمة لما هو موجود في العقيدة الإسلامية. لأن عندما نقول لا إكراه في الدين، فاللا إكراهية ليست بمعنى لا تكره الآخر على دين معين، ولكن معناها لا يكون هناك دين بالإكراه في المبدأ. ولذلك هذه من الثوابت الإسلامية التي يتمسك بها كل المسلمين ونعمل عليها، وهذه البيانات التي ذكرت دليل على ذلك.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank all the presenters for job well done. I particularly would like to thank Dr. Edward from UK, philosophical approach. I would also like to thank Sister Mariam. Just one question, because you mentioned three strategies. You talk about the monarchy and the Maliki Sufi strategy, and I would like to know the third one because I couldn't get it. I would like also to stress the point that if we are talking about protecting youth, I think the idea of looking at homes in terms of what we watch, because normally, even from the time of the cartoon networks that even watch our kids, there we develop the culture of violence. The culture of violence is started at homes, and I think if we do not control the media from that end, when you allow your child to watch, even from the cartoon side, killings and everything without any penalties, this is something that I think together, if we do, we will try to control the culture of violence at the youth, and the de-radicalization strategies to be put. These are things that if we do together, we will be able to control. Thank you very much for your attention.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. في الحقيقة هناك الإسلام هو أكثر الأديان استيعابا للآخر، ودليلنا على التنوع إذا ما راجعنا لعهود الإسلام الأولى، دستور المدينة، والعهدة العمرية عند دخول القدس، أو إيلياء خطبة الوداع، النموذج الأندلسي يجب أن نرجع لها جيدا وندرسها. وليست كل الدوافع لثورة الشباب دينية. بوعزيزي في تونس لم يكن إسلاميا متطرفا، ولكن عندما نجد أن الشباب يجدوا أمامهم البطالة وعدم قدرتهم على حرية التعبير وعلى القتل والاعتقال كما يجري في بلاد كثيرة مؤيدة من كثير من الدول التي أنكرت مبادئها في سبيل مصالحها، هنا يلجأ الشباب إلى العنف. ليس الدين هو الدافع، ولكن هناك أسباب اقتصادية. وعندما نركز على داعش ونترك الحشد الشعبي ونترك كوكليكس كلان لم تكن إسلامية، والحشد الشعبي الذي يقتل بدون رحمة ليس إسلاميا. إذن لابد من عدالة توزيع المسؤوليات. وشكرا.
Assalamu alaikum. Shalom. I came here as a translator for one of the participants, and my own personal experience as an American from a very small town in upstate New York, conservative, very pro-Bush, very anti-Obama. I had the honor to live with a Jewish family in Long Island. I also had the honor to, for over a couple of months, I also had the honor to live with a Muslim family, with Muslim families. And I see it's very important that we discuss theories and histories and theologies and things like that to know us more. But I believe that we should also look at those cases where interreligious dialogue is not just dialogue, it's where people of different faiths live in the same households. For instance, those families, for example, in Palestine and Israel, where you have Jewish and Muslim mothers and fathers with children of combined identities, and for instance, Christian and Muslim families and Christian and Jewish families. You know, these are the people who, for example, who have lived a multi-ethnic, a multi-religious background and could really give us some insight, because what I've noticed is that the best relationships that have developed are the Umar ibn Khattab, the second caliph, said you don't know a person until you've traveled with him for almost 40 days, 30 or 40 days. When you've lived with this person and traveled with him, when you live with other people in other faiths, when you eat with them, when you sleep with them, not necessarily in the same bed, I mean, you live as a family, okay? You eat with them, you go out with them, you cry when they cry, you're happy when they're happy. I think it's here, and respecting our religious identity. For example, I can be a Muslim, Father Narciso, he's a Christian. Okay, the gentleman from Argentina, he's Jewish. One of my best friends is Jewish. And the last thing we look at these differences, rather this variety, this diversity, is what makes our relationship probably even stronger. And thank you very much.
The gentleman in the first row, please.
Hello.
In the first. Yes.
Thank you. Sami Nusaf from Kuwait. My compliment to Dr. Samak. My question is, don't you think part of the problem or the major problem for not being to contradict or to question what we inherit is that the best brains doesn't go to study Sharia. It goes to study medicine, engineering, and so on. And if we look at the CV of our religious leaders, whether they are Sunni or Shia, and compare them to the Pope, for example, you can see the difference. This is why we cannot have a letter similar to the one which the Pope sent. And just in a couple of seconds, to my friend here, I saw in Leicester, Birmingham, and many other cities, a faith council where a Jew, a Christian, a Muslim, a Sikh, and so on, sits together on a weekly basis. I wish we can see similar whether in New York or here in the Middle East. Thank you.
شكرا.
Just a second, do you want to answer? Yes, please. Just a second, please.
عندي جوابين على سؤالين. القضية الأولى، من الطبيعي أن نحترم ردود فعل الشباب على البطالة، على سوء المعاملة، على عدم توفر الخدمات، ولكن ممارسة العنف إلى درجة العمل الإرهابي باسم الإسلام للرد على هذه الأوضاع، هذا ما يجب أن نقف عنده برفض وليس بحذر فقط، لأن توظيف الإسلام في عمليات ردات الفعل هذه تسيء إلى الإسلام، كما نجد بشكل أساء المسلمون بهذه ردود الفعل إلى الإسلام أكثر مما أساء إلى الإسلام خصوم الإسلام نفسه. أنا أؤيد تماما ما تفضلتم به في موضوع يعني المستوى العلمي أو حتى الاجتماعي لبعض رجال الدين عندما أو يتفرغون لبعض، وأضع خط منه، ليس فقط أنهم ليسوا على مستوى عالي من العلم، ولكن نعرف حالات الذين يفشلون في الدراسات يتوجهون إلى الدراسة الدينية، ويصبح هذا الفاشل إماما لنا في المساجد ومعلما هذه المشكلة، وهذه استثناءات، لكن الاستثناءات تغلب في هذه الموجة من التطرف، يغطي الجهل بالتطرف، وهذه مشكلة كبيرة. شكرا لك.
طيب، بالأمس كنا نقول أن هناك مصير مشترك وأرض وطن واحدة. اليوم نقول أنه بالحفاظ على مفهوم المصير المشترك والتاريخ المشترك وأرض خيمة الوطن، نقول أنه هناك مواطنة عالمية. هناك الأنا القليل عندي موجود عند الآخر، والأقلية الموجودة عند الآخر موجودة عندي، وما يحدث عندي اليوم ينعكس على الآخر. وبالتالي أنا أنوه بعرض الذي قدمته مريم في التجربة المغربية، لأنها استطاعت فعلا أن تحمي الاختراق الأمني للأمن الفكري والروحي للمجتمع المغربي عبر هيكلة موضوع الأمن الروحي وفق مؤسسات يعني تواجه الفتاوى العابرة للقارات وتواجه الاختراقات الفكرية. بالنسبة للدكتور السماك، أشكرك على موضوع الدين والتدين، وكما ذكرت بالأمس مفهوم الدين الفطري والتدين المعرفي. ألم يحن الوقت اليوم للاجتهاد، لرفع الحصار على الاجتهاد؟ لأنه كما أن مقاصد الشريعة تحدثت عن حفظ العقل، نحن تركناه في حفظ العقل من السكر، ولم ننتبه إلى أن العقل مات لمدة قرون، أوقفناه وحاصرناه عن الاجتهاد. واليوم نحن لا نقدس الدين بقدر ما نقدس المفسرين للدين، وهذا يعني ينبغي أن نراجع الذات في هذا الأمر بالضبط. وينبغي أيضا نحن أن نقدم الشهادات دون انتظار الإذن. حان الوقت لأن نجتهد، لأنه لن يعطى الإذن في هذا الاجتهاد، فعلى الكل أن ينطلق من نفسه وأن يبدأ بالاجتهاد في إعادة قراءة مفهوم الدين كما ينبغي. شكرا.
I just want to compliment and support the idea proposed by Dr. Othman from Malaysia that proper religious instruction in the early ages would somehow eliminate the violence in the name of God and religions, and also it would give some sort of message of peace and harmony among the people of different religions. And moreover, I also agree and with the message given by the Edward Kessler that what are the ways and means by which we can enhance and give the message of tolerance and also the message of peace among the religions. He has proposed 4 ways and means by which in the present century we can give the message of peace and love, especially encourage all the religions to accept, recognize, and also understand the messages. And ultimately, it should ensure that peace and harmony is always sustained in the community, so that in the name of religions, in the name of God, there shall not arise any case of violence or intolerance. Thank you.
We need to finish. I'm so sorry because there are many hands that are trying to ask the microphone, but another hand is to say me, that I have to finish. I'm so sorry. We must finish, but only look at around you. Jewish, Christians, and Muslims sitting all together. And try to imagine the world if in every city could be the religion leaders sitting all together, try to speak each to other. How different could be the world. Thank you very much to Doha Interfaith Center and to all of you.
We need to announce something very important, so please, just 4 minutes, okay? We are going to organize workshops tomorrow morning, and I have the 2 trainers. They will give you a very short brief about them. Okay? Thank you.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Is it okay if we share a little bit about the work that we're going to do? Yes. I'm Sara Malawi. I'm from Saudi Arabia, and I'm based in London. I'm doing a PhD on Quran translations in Muslim communities. And this is my colleague and friend, Andrea Titan. She's from the Netherlands, and she's also based in London. She's an associate lecturer at Goldsmith University, and she's working at Applied Theater and Interfaith Dialogue. Everything that we've heard in this conference in these 2 past days about security and intellectual safety and spiritual safety, a lot of speakers mentioned that it's very important to connect with the society, to go down on a grassroots level, to take it to youth, to take it to schools, universities, and so on. And basically, our workshop is doing this. So it's very important, and we recognize the importance of stepping from an ivory tower and going into these grassroots societies and communities. My friend Andrea here, she's going to explain a bit about the workshop and the work we do. And yes.
So yes, in the spirit of dialogue and getting connected and talking to each other, we invite you to partake in our workshop, which is a participatory, interactive, creative workshop in which we draw on creative models and techniques for dialogue. It's particularly designed for, like Sarah said, young people on community levels, so it's ideal for trainers, educators who would like a practical hands-on experience of creative dialogue techniques, including theater techniques, to have a space in which we can create a space for personal connection and looking at the influence of media, narratives, imagery that seeps into our social realities and how that influences the lens through which we see and understand each other. So it's very interactive. It will not be sitting and talking. Everybody will be up on their feet and active participants in that workshop. We're very grateful that the conference has provided space for us to do this, and it's especially for people that have later flights as well. So we're very honored to be here in Doha and to share our work with you. So it is in Salwa 1? Yeah, 9:30 to 12:30. There is an Eventbrite link that has been emailed around to people with late flights. However, do please come and speak to us and we'll take your email and we'll send you an invitation for registration. So for those that are interested, there are flyers outside as well that look like this. So for those that are interested, we would love to see you tomorrow morning. It's 9:30 to 12:30 in Salwa 1. Thank you very much.